Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see everybody's face, even though they're limited to little boxes. It's still a great joy to be here and to see everyone's face. It's the next best thing to being here. So tonight we'll follow our usual format. I believe I did a sort of timing of the Dharma talk, and I hesitate to tell you, but it seems a little longer than usual. So maybe we'll do a seated meditation and then the walking meditation, and then follow it with the Dharma talk. I want to make sure there's time for everyone to share. Can you all hear me clearly? Okay, good. So let's begin by finding a comfortable position, but do I dare say not too comfortable? You want to have a reasonably vertical spine. And then as you close your eyes, just relax into the peace of silence. I'll be inviting 3 sounds of the bell to take us deeper. And I invite you to put aside all of the fuss and bother of the day and just enjoy the rhythm of breath and enjoy the silence we share together. before we begin our walking meditation practice, it might be good to take just a moment while you're still seated to sort of move a few muscles, maybe move your neck and your toes and shoulders. Come back into your body, so to speak. And then we'll do the usual several sounds of the bell. The first one to stand, and the second one is the opportunity to bow to the Sangha. I like to think of it as sending out a blessing to everyone who's here. And then the third, we turn and walk, and that'll be for a few minutes of silent walking. And the suggestion is that we coordinate the breath with the movement of our feet. So whatever pace works for you, you step with maybe step left and inhale slowly, and then step right and exhale slowly. I like to also put a thought on the breath, and you can do that as well if you'd like. You can inhale, yes, and exhale, thank you. And just stay with that as a kind of a repeated mantra as your feet greet the earth. coming back to our places behind our chairs. Well, I chose for a topic for this evening, interbeing. And it turns out that that's a topic that's actually fairly common in a number of different wisdom traditions. Many of these traditions make reference to this concept of our interconnectedness, our deep oneness. Judaism has a symbol of a tree of life, and in Hinduism there's a metaphor called Indra's net, and I'll talk about that a little more later on. And the Native Americans, of course, talk about our oneness with nature. And you might be interested in knowing that in Islam, the very word Allah means the one. So there is this concept widely held of interdependence, and it's rather fundamental in the Buddhist tradition. According to Thich Nhat Hanh, this idea of interbeing, or it's called interdependent co-arising. It has a number of different translations of the concept. Thich Nhat Hanh's way of settling on it is interbeing. It's not a belief. Thich Nhat Hanh says it's a way of seeing. And he says, furthermore, we can cultivate this way of seeing by meditating on this interdependence that we see. So in our ordinary world, the regular world, things appear to exist as separate entities that have a specific place. But according to Buddhism, this sense of separateness is false. So the language they use to express this is no self, meaning no independently existing entity. The expression no self does not mean nothing. And sometimes this concept is referred to as the Buddhist teaching on cause and effect. Now, usually we typically think about cause as kind of a straight line. Here's the cause and here's the effect, and there's a line that connects the two. But according to Thai, there's never one cause followed by one effect the way we usually think of it. It's not linear. Instead, he says there are always multiple causes and multiple effects, and they are co-arising. Cause and effect has everything intertwined. The image is more of a network or a web rather than a straight line. So this, he says, or the Buddhists say, is true for not just the tangible world we see, the world of chairs and bananas and so on, but also for the more abstract world of thoughts and ideas and feelings and so on. So now, in my exploration, I've come across interdependence in many different realms, especially in the realms of science. So tonight I'd like to explore 3 realms of science, which I think very well embody the concept of interdependence and interbeing. The realm of physiology, or you might say physiology anatomy, the realm of physics, look out, we're going to talk about physics, and the realm of ecology. So we'll start with physiology. And here's a nice quote from Ty that I think summarizes this interconnectedness that we already know about in our bodies. He says, quote, "You know that a river of blood nourishes all the cells of your body, and that your organs, composed of cells, enrich, purify, and propel the blood. All the body's organs, including the nervous system and glands, rely on each other for existence. Lungs are necessary for blood, so lungs belong to blood. Blood is necessary to lungs, so blood belongs to lungs. In the same way, we can say lungs belong to heart, liver belongs to lungs, and so forth. And we see that every organ in the body implies the existence of all the others. This is called interdependence of all things, or interbeing in the sutra. Cause and effect are no longer perceived as linear, but as a net, not as a two-dimensional one, but a system of countless nets interwoven in all directions in multi-dimensional space. One is present in all, and all are present in each one. The presence of one implies the presence of all the others." Quote. So I think we've known since we studied basic biology that all of these organs are operating together and that they're all dependent on one another to create one great organism called you. And in fact, we refer to them as the systems, the digestive system and the respiratory system. These are networks. So now let's turn to the second realm, which I've always been kind of interested in, the realm of physics. There's been an age-old quest in physics to find the most basic fundamental building blocks of matter, the material world. Now, the old model of the atom is what you and I probably remember from textbooks in school. There's an atom, it has a center that's a neutron and a proton, and there's a little electron zooming around, orbiting around, and the whole model looks like a little itty-bitty tiny solar system. The electron, which the physicists now describe, it's a little bit head-scratching with the world of physics. They describe the electron as a sizeless point in space. So now we thought we had the most fundamental building blocks, but then we discover, or the scientists discover, that there are subatomic particles. They're really, really tiny, and it's not fair to imagine that they're like little itty-bitty tennis balls. They're inconceivably small. So you may recall some years back, there was a discovery of this subatomic particle called a quark, which one scientist guesses to be 43 billion billionths of a centimeter. So it's really inconceivably small. So here's this quark. Well, now quarks are divided up into even smaller particles. And now I'm going to give you the language that the physicists use to describe these particles. They come in 6 flavors. That's not my word, that's their word. The 6 flavors of small subatomic particles. And the flavors come in pairs, named as follows: up, down, top, bottom, strange, and charm. These are the actual names of these flavors of subatomic particles. So the world, when you get down there to that level of tiny, the world is really hard to follow because it doesn't follow the normal rules of our everyday world. And the scientific laws that apply to our world, what we're most familiar with, the laws we know, those laws don't apply. So I'll give you a few examples. Example 1, subatomic particles can be in 2 places at once. So here's a quote straight out of Discover magazine. Quote, about 80 years ago, scientists discovered that it is possible to be in 2 locations at the same time, at least for subatomic particles such as an electron. For such tiny things, the world is governed by a madhouse set of physical laws known as quantum mechanics. At that size range, every bit of matter and energy exists in a state of blurry flux, allowing it to occupy not just 2 locations, but an infinite number of them simultaneously. The world we see follows a totally different set of rules, of course. Physics weirdness example number 2. Shoot a photon, which is a tiny, tiny particle that creates light. Shoot a photon through a barrier with 2 holes, and it will go through both holes without dividing. Weirdness example number 3. Particle pairs have spin, quote, in relation to each other. This word spin is just, it's not exactly the way we think of spin, but it's some sort of activity that they do. But they come in pairs and they spin in relation to each other. What the scientists found, and this really goes to the point of interconnectedness, you can separate the pair by thousands of miles. And if you reverse the spin of one half, the other half also reverses. Physical weird example number 4, it's called bootstrap physics. Thich Nhat Hanh seems to be very familiar with this thinking, current thinking in the world of physics, because he makes some references to bootstrap physics. Here's a summary of this scientific explanation. Bootstrap physics, quote, renounces the idea of basic elements of matter. The universe is a network of independent phenomena in which each phenomenon is formed by the coordination of all other phenomena. The universe is a dynamic fabric of independent events in which none is the fundamental entity. What we call particles are only mutual relationships among the particles themselves. Let me repeat that, it's so mind-bending. What we call particles are only mutual relationships among the particles themselves. Clearly, this is an example of interdependence in the realm of physics. So the third realm of interdependence that's, I think, fun to explore and something we all sort of intuitively have a grasp of is the realm of ecology. Around the 50s and 60s, there was a sort of new scientific way of focusing on thinking about the world of nature. And it was a beginning of examining the fact that all the living beings live in very complicated interdependencies, that they're in close relationships of one kind or another with their environments. And furthermore, the awareness is that we humans are a part of this global ecosystem. And in fact, that's when the word became popular, ecosystems. And they're, in fact, the word systems, which made reference to earlier when I was talking about the digestive system, the systems became kind of a key word in many areas, like in psychology. There was a growth of something called family systems therapy, where you examine the impact of the whole structure of the family. And in the realm of anthropology and in science, there was this groundbreaking book called Silent Spring. Some of us, in fact, most of us may remember it. It was looking at the global impact of humankind's choices. And it was a way of thinking about nature as a web or a network of relationships. You may have actually seen pictures of something called the food web, where you have plants and little animals and bigger animals, and you see the way they're all connected. In fact, students are currently taught about the web of life and the interconnections between the different species. Back in the dark ages when I was learning about biology, I don't think we learned about nature as a net of interconnected species. It was more like a focus on the different classification systems for the animals and the plants. So now think about this word net, and in fact, I'm going to ask you to sort of put a mental bookmark in the word net, and we'll come back to it in just a few minutes. So Thich Nhat Hanh gives examples of more than just the living species, the plants and animals, but he actually includes all of the elements of earth, air, fire, water. And it's the idea of Gaia, of Mother Earth, or Gaia, Mother Earth, a complex living system of interdependencies. The classic example that Thich Nhat Hanh gives is to be able to see a cloud in a piece of paper. Quote, "If you were a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are." Buddha sums up with, quote, "This is because that is. This is not because that is not. This comes to be because that comes to be. This ceases to be because that ceases to be." Now, with the idea of interdependence and causes and effects in mind, let me share a story I made up to demonstrate relationships and interdependencies in the natural world. The turkey vulture is one of the main characters. You know him. He circles way up to 3 miles high, and he can go for hours without flapping his wings. You might see him sometimes, he sort of tips from one side to the other, and he's actually flying in a very efficient way so as not to have to flap his wings. He just rides on thermals and doesn't expend much energy. And he also has an extraordinarily keen sense of smell. So our vulture is up in the sky, just circling. And it's a hot summer afternoon, and a speeding car comes along and instantly strikes and kills a deer. The deer, we'll say, was thrown into a nearby dense wooded area. High up in the sky overhead, our turkey vulture is soaring, and he's hungry for fresh not aged carrion. But in the web of his ecosystem, there are some competitors, enemies, if you will. There might be other birds like hawks, or some little animals like raccoons or foxes that might make a meal of this deer before the vulture can get to it. But the greatest competitors are microbes, bacteria that hope to take advantage of the nutrition in the deer carcass. These microbes have a distinct advantage on a hot summer day. They are incredibly fast. But now here's what happens, and I think it's fascinating. The bacteria immediately start to release plumes of a very foul odor, which is extremely disagreeable and fiercely toxic to other hawks, raccoons, and foxes, and by the way, people as well. So these fast-moving microbes scare off their competition with a poisonous, nasty smell. But guess what? That same smell says, come and get it, to the vulture, who can't see all that well, but whose sensitivity to this particular smell can be detected from a mile in the sky. For the vulture, this aroma is wonderful. In the next sequence of events, millions of harmful microbes are destroyed in the gut of the turkey vulture. To be precise, the microbes responsible for anthrax and cholera are destroyed by passing through the turkey vulture, to the great benefit of human beings. So for us, it's a great thing. But not all of the bacteria are destroyed in this battery acid in the vulture's stomach. Some pass through the vulture to add nutrition to the soil, which supports the grasses, the bushes, the trees that are browsed by deer. So, are these microscopic critters enemies or friends? Are they competitors or cooperators? The earliest studies of ecosystems attempted to identify what the scientists called keystone species. That is, they believed there would be one species that was holding it all together. It was so vital that if you take that out of the system, the entire system will crash. But remarkably, some further studies reinforce the scientific belief that all of the species turned out to be vital. So the scientists had to kind of go back and redefine this concept. If it's a stable ecosystem, totally removing any part would lead to the destruction of the entire system. In other words, all the parts are interdependent, with the parts depending on the whole system and the whole system depending on the parts. Now, let's go back and return to the word net. Are you ready for a deep dive into Vedic philosophy? There's an ancient myth involving a sky god named Indra. Now, the source of this is the Vedas, the ancient Hindu scriptures. By the way, Gautama Buddha was born and died a Hindu and would have been familiar with Vedic scripture. The concept of Indra's net passed from Hinduism to Buddhism, and according to Thich Nhat Hanh, it's a fundamental concept in Buddhism. So the sky god Indra has a net, and this net is infinite, spreading across the vastness of all creation. And at each node of the net, he placed a perfect jewel. Now here's what's remarkable about each jewel. It's polished to reflect the entire infinite net with all its infinite jewels. Taking it a step further, if you were to drill down and look closely at the reflection appearing on each jewel, you'd see again each reflected jewel reflecting the entire net of reflected jewels and so on endlessly. Have you ever had the experience of seeing a double reflection in a mirror that seems to go on and on and on infinitely? Well, that's a similar idea, except that the myth is intended to convey this idea that the whole contains the parts and the parts contain the whole. And as if that isn't mind-bending enough, we are not to think of the jewels as separate fixed things, just like quarks, etc., aren't exactly things, because all the jewels and the net are in flux, constantly changing. Indra's net holds together and is dependent on all the parts. Remember, there's no one keystone species in the ecosystem. They're all needed to hold it together. So the parts, so to speak, cause the existence of the whole causes the existence of the parts. And according to Buddhist thinking, it's not just the three realms that I've talked about, physics and ecology and physiology, but it's also true for all realms. Now, finally, we get to really the critical issue: what's the point? It seems like a sort of an abstract philosophical concept, but how does this translate into practical terms in terms of our lives? Again, Thai suggests and the Buddhists suggest you can cultivate this view of interdependence, and it will help us all to relate more constructively to the reality that is our lives. So think about these ideas that are Buddhist ideas closely related. One, impermanence. Everything is in flux. Everything is coming into being and, so to speak, arising as a result of many causes and conditions. Number two, emptiness. It's not nothing, but it's rather empty of a separate, discrete reality. All existence is relational. Understood correctly, this emptiness inspires a sense of optimism, not pessimism, because it reminds us of the endless range of possibilities of who we can become and how we can live. Our lives are wide open to becoming. Three, non-self. You know, we Americans have this tradition of really emphasizing the self, the individual. And this is kind of the opposite idea. It's the idea of get over yourself, realize that you're really deeply connected to all things, living and non-living and concrete and abstract, all of these things. It's a way of viewing reality that tends to rein in egoism. Compassion, the idea that we see all animals and other living things as part of the family that we belong to. Let me see, I think I lost my place here. Loving kindness is sort of a natural byproduct of the deep awareness of interbeing. You're more inclined to be kind in your dealings with animals and with other humans, easier to maybe walk in another's shoes, feel deep empathy, to stop seeing the separate self as so critical and crucial and important. Again, it's not a doctrine, it's a way of looking. Here's a quote from Thai. We have to train ourselves to see that everyone and everything belong to the same stream of life. If we truly grasp interdependent co-arising, we can better see the big picture, see ourselves in others, walk more easily in the shoes of others, feel greater compassion, offer forgiveness more readily. Living in a world of interdependence has very specific implications for us. It means our actions affect others. It makes us all responsible for one another, quote. So finally, I'm going to share with you a Nasruddin story. Nasruddin is, in the Sufi tradition, he's a mullah, a teacher, a wise man, but he's a crazy, clownish kind of wise man, the wise fool. And you know, this wise fool image pops up in a number of folk traditions. Well, he's in the Sufi tradition. All the kids in the Middle East and Turkey and Iran and Arab countries, they all know about Nasruddin. There's hundreds and hundreds of folk stories. So the idea is that they're slightly amusing stories, but they're pointing to some ancient wisdom, and you understand and read the story on several levels. So the story I'm about to share with you, I thought I got it, but then as I went through it 2 or 3 more times, I saw multiple meanings in it. So here we go. Nasruddin. Walking one evening along a deserted road, Mullah Nasruddin saw a troop of horsemen coming towards him. His imagination started to work. He imagined himself captured and sold as a slave or impressed into the army. Nasruddin bolted, climbed a wall into a graveyard, and lay down in an open tomb. Puzzled at his strange behavior, the men, honest travelers, followed him. They found him stretched out, tense and quivering. "What are you doing in that grave? We saw you run away. Can we help you?" "Just because you can ask a question does not mean that there is a straightforward answer to it," said the mullah, who now realized what had happened. "It all depends upon your viewpoint. If you must know, however, I am here because of you, and you are here because of me." All right, I'll end with that and hope that you all will share your wisdom. You know, we all learn from each other's experiences and strengths. So I'll open it now for an opportunity for sharing